Stop. Before you click that upgrade button, before you insert that USB drive, before you let Windows Update push you toward Windows 11, I need you to watch this entire video because what I am about to tell you changes the decision you're about to make. Millions of people right now are being funneled toward Windows 11 through a combination of Microsoft's messaging and a signal of support pressure and a quiet sense that they have no other option. Windows 10 reached its end of life on October 14th, 2025. The upgrade notifications are everywhere. The logic seems simple. Windows 10 is dead, so you install Windows 11 and move on. But that logic collapses the moment you understand what you're actually agreeing to when you install Windows 11 in 2026, and it collapses even faster when you understand that there is a genuinely good alternative that is free, that runs on the hardware you already own, that does not treat you as a data source, and that millions of people around the world, including national governments, have already switched to. I have spent considerable time researching exactly what Windows 11 is doing in 2026, what Microsoft's own Windows president has admitted about the state of the operating system, and what the realistic path forward looks like for someone who does not want to be part of that system. By the end of this video, you will have everything you need to make this decision clearly and without regret. Let's start with what Microsoft's own people are saying about Windows 11, because the most damning testimony about this operating system does not come from Linux advocates or privacy researchers. It comes from inside the building. In January 2026, Pavan Devuluri, the president of Windows and Devices at Microsoft, publicly acknowledged that Windows 11 had, in his own words, gone off track. He announced that Microsoft would spend all of 2026 in a mode called swarming, 4 years of development. That is an extraordinary admission. The president of the Windows division was publicly telling the world that his product had been mismanaged badly enough that the entire engineering organization needed to stop building new things and focus on repairing damage, and the specific things that users on the Windows insider forums, on Reddit, and in the broader technology community had been loudly identifying as damage were consistent and damning. The Start menu is cluttered with advertisements for apps and services that users never asked for. The Windows taskbar, which has been the central navigation element of Windows for 3 decades, was broken in ways that basic productivity workflows depended on. Copilot buttons had been injected into Notepad, Paint, the Photos app, File Explorer, the Settings panel, the Snipping tool, and the Widgets panel, features that users consistently described as adding steps rather than saving them. Update KB5036980 in April 2024 injected promoted Screen, the Settings application, File Explorer, and the Windows notification system. OneDrive was configured to enable automatically without user consent, moving files to the cloud and, in some cases, causing few seconds, and stores the images in a searchable database. Was present on Copilot plus hardware, had been demonstrated by security researchers to be exploitable for extracting everything from bank account numbers to personal messages, and was still generating fresh security concerns in early 2026, even after Microsoft reworked and relaunched it. The Windows president's swarming announcement was Microsoft admitting, officially, that the operating system it had been shipping for 4 years was not in the state it needed to be. And critically, the things that the swarming effort targeted were the visible UI annoyances. The data collection, the forced Microsoft accounts, the telemetry that continues even when users disable it in settings, the OneDrive integration, the recall infrastructure. None of those were in the repair plan. Because those are not bugs, those are features of Microsoft's revenue model. The hardware requirement situation is the part of the Windows 11 story that most directly affects the largest number of people, and it deserves more clarity than Microsoft's marketing provides. Windows 11 requires a Trusted Platform Module version 2.0, a supported processor generation, UEFI Secure Boot, and at minimum 4 GB of RAM and 64 GB of storage. These requirements excluded approximately 20% of all PCs worldwide at the time Windows 11 launched. That is not a rounding error. It is hundreds of millions of machines that are entirely capable of running a first-generation AMD Ryzen processors are not supported. Intel's 6th generation Core processors, the ones inside perfectly functional laptops and sold just a few years ago, are not supported. Many machines with Intel 7th generation processors sit in a gray zone where they may run but are not officially supported. The practical reality for the person sitting in front of one of these machines when Windows 10 reached end of life on October 14th, 2025, was a forced choice between 3 options. They could buy new hardware, a significant financial expenditure that most people were not planning to make. They could continue running Windows 10 without security updates, which is a genuinely dangerous position to be in on a machine that connects to the internet. Or they could pay Microsoft $30 per year for extended security updates for Windows 10, purchasing continued patches for an operating system they already paid for. a subscription model for a product that was never sold to them as a subscription. There is a fourth option that Microsoft's messaging never presents to users in its upgrade notifications, and that is the option this video is about. The forced Microsoft account requirement is the piece of the Windows 11 experience that privacy experts have described most consistently as a fundamental change in the relationship between users and their operating system. From Windows 11 version 25H2, which released in October 2025, Microsoft significantly tightened every bypass method that technically minded users had previously used to create local accounts during setup, where previous versions allowed you to disconnect from the internet during installation to trigger a local account option, or to use specific command line tricks to skip the account requirement. The 25H2 release closed most of those pathways. As of early 2026, setting up a new Windows 11 machine without a Microsoft account requires deliberate technical effort. Using modified installation media created with tools like Rufus and specific script-based workarounds that most ordinary users have no knowledge of and no reason to know how to execute. For the vast majority of people who just want to use their computer, the setup flow of Windows 11 funnels them into a Microsoft account, whether they want one or not. And a Microsoft account is not just a login credential. It is a connection between your computer and Microsoft's cloud infrastructure that enables BitLocker encryption keys to be stored on Microsoft servers, enables recall data to be associated with a named identity rather than an anonymous hardware identifier, enables telemetry data to be connected to a real person rather than a device, and gives Microsoft a legal and technical foothold in your computing environment that it did not have when you were using a local account. Privacy advocate Rob Braxman, who has covered this specific aspect of Windows 11's account architecture in detail, described the forced Microsoft account as a kill chain, a series of connected hooks that, once engaged, I can make it progressively harder to use Windows 11 in a way that does not continuously expose your data to Microsoft systems. That is the operating system you are being asked to install. Here's what I want you to do instead. And I want to be specific and practical, because this decision is not as complicated as it might feel right now. What I am recommending is Linux. And before you stop watching because you heard the word Linux and immediately thought of something that requires a PhD to operate, let me give you 30 seconds of context that changes that assumption entirely. Linux in 2026 is not what Linux looked like 5 years ago. It is not a command line interface that you have to learn before you can do anything. It is a mature, polished, graphically rich operating system with a start menu, a taskbar, a file manager, application stores, and a desktop environment that your hands already know how to use. Because the best Linux distributions for Windows switchers have spent years studying exactly what makes Windows feel familiar and building that familiarity deliberately into their interface. The two distributions that every privacy researcher, every technology publication, and every experienced Linux user consistently recommends for people coming from Windows are Linux Mint with the Cinnamon Desktop and Zorin OS 18. Both are free. Both run on hardware that is years too old for Windows 11. Both install in under 30 minutes from a USB drive. Both include a web browser, a document editor, a media player, and every essential tool a computer needs on day one, pre-installed and ready to use. And both can be tried from a USB drive, completely without risk, without touching your existing operating system or your files, before you decide whether to install anything permanently. Linux Mint with the Cinnamon Desktop is the option that the Linux community recommends more consistently than any other for Windows users making this switch for the first time. The Cinnamon Desktop has a taskbar at the bottom, an application menu in the bottom left corner, a system tray in the bottom right, a clock, desktop icons, and window controls that work exactly the way Windows window controls work. If you sat someone down in front of a fresh Linux Mint installation without telling them what it was, the majority of everyday tasks, browsing the web, opening a document, managing files, adjusting settings, would proceed without any moment of confusion. Linux Mint 22.3 Vera, released in March 2026, brought GNOME Online Accounts integration into the Cinnamon Desktop, allowing users to connect their Google, Microsoft, and other online accounts directly to the system for calendar, contacts, and cloud access. It ships with multimedia codecs pre-installed, which means your video and audio files work from the very first boot without installing anything extra. It does not include snap packages by default, which many users prefer, because snap packages can introduce startup delays and management complications that Mint deliberately avoids. The update manager in Linux Mint is one of the clearest and most user-friendly update interfaces in any operating system. It tells you exactly what each update does, rates updates by stability risk, and gives you control over what gets installed rather than silently applying changes the way Windows Update frequently does. Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu 24.04 LTS, which means it receives security support through 2029. You can install it today and know that your system will receive security patches for years without any forced upgrade, any paid subscription, or any notification telling you that your hardware is no longer supported. Zorin OS 18.1, released in April 2026, is the alternative for the person who wants the transition from Windows to feel not just familiar, but actively designed around them. The Zorin Appearance app gives you the ability to switch your entire desktop layout between presets that mimic Windows 11, Windows 10, or Mac OS with a single click. The taskbar position, the application menu style, the icon arrangement, all of it changes to match whatever Windows layout your hands remember. Zorin 18.1 ships with an expanded Windows application detection system that covers over 240 popular Windows programs. When you try to run a Windows installer file on Zorin, the system recognizes it and points you directly to the native Linux equivalent or the compatibility tool that will handle it. It ships with Brave browser as the default, which blocks trackers and ads from the first moment you open it. It includes LibreOffice 26.2 with improved Microsoft Office format compatibility that is now good enough for the vast majority of everyday document work. And like Linux Mint, it is based on Ubuntu with long-term support through 2029. The free core edition covers everything most users need, for users who are genuinely nervous about the switch and want something that will look and feel as close to Windows as anything in the Linux ecosystem. Zorin OS is the most deliberately engineered answer to that specific concern available in 2026. The practical path forward looks like this, and I want to walk you through it step by step because the process is simpler than most people expect. You download the ISO file for whichever distribution you have chosen. The download is free from the official website and is around 3 gigabytes in size. You use a free tool called Rufus on Windows or Bellini Etcher on any platform to write that ISO to a USB drive that is at least 8 gigabytes in size. You restart your computer with the USB drive inserted, and at the startup screen, you press the appropriate key to access the boot menu, typically F12, F8, or F2, depending on your machine's manufacturer. You select the USB drive from the boot menu, and the Linux distribution loads into what is called a live environment. This is a fully functional version of the operating system running entirely from the USB drive without touching your hard drive at all. You can use it for as long as you want. Browse the web, open files, check that your Wi-Fi works, test the interface, see how your hardware responds, and when you shut it down, your machine goes back to exactly the state it was in before. Nothing was installed. Nothing was changed. If you decide you want to install it, the installer is on the desktop and walks you through this process with plain language explanations. If you decide you are not ready, you pull out the USB drive and move on with your day. There's no commitment, no financial risk, and no reason not to spend an afternoon with it before you make a decision. The one question that comes up every time someone considers this switch is the software question. Will the programs I use work? And the honest answer in 2026 for the vast majority of everyday users is yes. Web browsers, including Firefox, Chrome, and Brave, are all available natively on Linux. LibreOffice handles documents, spreadsheets, and presentations with file formats that are compatible with Microsoft Office. Spotify, Discord, Zoom, Slack, Signal, Telegram, and most communication and media tools either have native Linux versions or run perfectly in the browser. Steam runs natively on Linux, and Valve's Proton compatibility layer allows thousands of Windows games to run on Linux without any special configuration. For users who need Adobe Creative Cloud, AutoCAD, or other specific proprietary professional tools, those applications do not run on Linux, and this is a real limitation that deserves an honest acknowledgement. If your daily workflow depends on one of those specific tools with no viable alternative, that is a legitimate reason to evaluate your options differently. For the 95% of computer users whose daily work involves a browser, a document editor, email, video calls, and media, Linux covers all of it completely for free on the hardware Microsoft just told you was too old. The choice in front of you right now is not between Windows 10 and Windows 11. It is between an operating system that photographs your screen, collects your keystroke patterns, injects advertisements into your file manager, funnels you into a Microsoft account that ties your hardware to their cloud infrastructure, and just had its ON president admit it went off track. And an operating system that is free, runs on your existing hardware, collects no personal data, serves you no advertisements, and has already been chosen by national governments, police forces, and millions of individual users around the world who made exactly the same evaluation you are making right now. You do not have to make the switch permanently today. Put Linux Mint or Zorin OS on a USB drive. Spend an afternoon with it. See how it feels. The worst possible outcome is that you spend an afternoon using a free operating system and then go back to whatever you were doing before. The best possible outcome is that you find something that respects you as the person using it, runs faster on your existing hardware than anything Microsoft has shipped in years, and costs you nothing beyond the 30 minutes it takes to make a USB drive. That trade-off is not a difficult calculation. Make the USB drive before it is too late to make the decision calmly, before you get pushed into Windows 11 out of urgency rather than choice.